Join me in welcoming Patrick Lencioni to our show. Pat, welcome to Leadership Track.
Thanks for having me here, Mick.
Now, Patrick, you've written a lot of books, and your background is it in film writing, or how did you get involved in this whole area anyhow?
I went to college in Southern California down here at Claremont, and I studied economics and Spanish, but I took an elective in screenwriting, and probably to my father's chagrin, I started writing screenplays after I got out of school. I had a regular job too, but I was actually writing screenplays hoping to get something published. I loved writing dialogue, and so 7 years later when I decided to write my first leadership book based on my theories, I decided, hey, I'll write a book, a fable, a fiction story, and I think my readers have appreciated that because they're short, they're interesting, and kind of compelling, I think.
It's a novella, it's a novel form, and they're outstanding. Now, what was your motivation in writing the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team?
Well, it started with my first book, The 5 Temptations of a CEO, which was really about personal leadership, as you talk about, and how do people think about themselves as leaders. Then, as we started to apply those concepts to the CEOs that we worked with, we realized that with some modifications, it actually worked on their teams as well. And then when we wrote that book, it really took off because I think there was just some fundamental need for simple, powerful theories for improving teamwork and reducing politics at work.
Trust, how do you build it? You talk about trust in the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah, the key to trust, that's one of those words like management or leadership or communication or love that means all different kinds of things depending on the context. When I talk about trust on a team, I'm talking about the ability and the willingness of people to be vulnerable with the people that they work with. They have to be able to say things like, I don't know the answer to this, or I need help, or I'd like to be more like you because you're better than I am at this, or I made a mistake, or I'm sorry. They have to be human. And if people can't be human with one another, then you're not really trusting them because you're wondering what they're hiding. So trust in the context of teams for me is about vulnerability.
So then you would encourage leaders to be vulnerable with their subordinates?
Yes, I would. Now, a lot of times this is counterintuitive because people think you're not supposed to let them see you sweat, or the leader has to be on or strong. And to a certain extent, a leader has to be strong, but part of strength is being able to be truthful about who you are, and not everything about who you are works. So I think one of the most powerful things a leader can do is admit when they've got a weakness or when they need help with something. And people that work for a leader who's honest about that, they'll walk through fire for them.
Well, then what are some signs of a team that would, you talk about conflict, so what would be some signs of a team that would be having some constructive conflict?
Constructive conflict, even though we'd like to think it would be very neat and tidy, the fact is, meetings of a great team that's having good constructive conflict should be a little uncomfortable at times. Because if people are really disagreeing with each other, even around issues, there's always a little bit of a personal element there. And so people, if they go to meetings and they say that was boring and it was easy and there was no tension there, that's probably a sign that they're not having enough conflict. Great teams will be tired at the end of a good meeting.
People fear conflict, so Patrick, what would be the difference between good and bad conflict?
Right. Good conflict is focused on an issue. It can be passionate and emotional, but it's around an issue. It's around what the team is trying to do. Bad conflict is personally oriented. It's really focused on their personality or their character. And what I find, interestingly enough, is the teams that have regular conflict around issues are the same ones that don't have conflict around character because they've said everything that needs to be said and there's no oxygen for back channel politics. But it's the teams, many times nonprofits and churches and universities, that don't debate the issues, that go back in the hallway and say, I don't really like that guy.
Well, you have a team and they have to come up with, make decisions. So how do you get a team to collectively commit to a decision?
The key is putting the issue in the middle of the table and demanding that everyone weigh in and that there's nobody withholding any of their input. Because teams that weigh in, buy in. Because human beings need to know that their ideas have been heard, considered, and factored into the ultimate decision. And even if the ultimate decision doesn't necessarily reflect what they wanted, they're going to support it because they know that they've had their say and that the decision was made with the best of intentions.
So I'm a leader and I'm experiencing resistance from my team, or I'm a member of a team and I'm experiencing resistance from somebody else. How should I deal with that?
Well, I think what you have to do is ask yourself, why is the resistance there? If there's an honest intellectual difference of opinion and they really feel passionately about that, I think you want to encourage that until you feel like you've really heard them and they feel like they've been heard. If that resistance is coming from a different place, you really have to diagnose that correctly because maybe it's a self-esteem issue or it's a vulnerability issue. And what we find is on teams, the issue is not about the topic that they're talking about. It's really about something else. And they're wasting a lot of time debating an issue when in fact what they have to do is go back and talk about the interpersonal relationship. So it really depends on what that resistance is coming from.
We have consultants that will say consensus is good. We have others that will say consensus is not good. Would you elaborate on consensus? What does that mean to you?
I think consensus is a four-letter word. I think most important decisions, if you have a team of any size, you're not going to have complete consensus around a decision. However, complete commitment is great. Intel has a great theory, a phrase that they call disagree and commit. It's okay if everybody doesn't agree theoretically, but when they come out of that room, they're all on the same page. So consensus can mean everybody finding a mediocre answer that's equally displeasing to the whole team, or it can mean we're going to agree to disagree, but then we're going to have total commitment around an issue, and I like that one.
Sure. Consensus means we're all on the same page, we're committed to this decision, and people embrace what they help create.
Right. Trying to please everyone, though, is certainly not a good way to go.
So how do people respond or react to their particular input not being what ends up on the page?
Well, that's the amazing thing. I think human beings are more reasonable than we give them credit for. When I talk to a CEO, I'll say, were you a reasonable line manager or employee? And they're like, oh yeah, I was reasonable. But somehow none of your employees are reasonable now, right? And they're like, they laugh. Because what they need to realize is that people can buy into a decision that they didn't necessarily agree with in theory if they've been heard. If you've really listened to them and you can explain, here's why I'm not going to go with that decision, but I understand what you're saying, I need your support. So I think what we have to do is trust that people are reasonable.
That's a great way to raise kids.
That's right. That's right. I mean, they're going to love you even if you have to disagree with them. And if you're never disagreeing with your kids, you're in big trouble.
What is accountability to a team, and what does it look like?
I love accountability because I struggle with it as a leader sometimes, and it's so powerful. Accountability in its best sense is peer-to-peer. People talk about, a guy came up to me after I did a talk today, and he said, I have a guy on my team, and I can't fire him, and if I can't fire him, then how do I hold him accountable? And I said, well, if you can build trust and real commitment on the team, then more important than him losing his job or having his pay docked or anything like that, it's going to be the fear of letting down his peers that's going to drive his performance. And that's the best form of accountability, is I'm accountable to them because I don't want them to think I've let them down. Peer-to-peer is the best accountability, not necessarily manager-to-peer.
Sure. Being a team member can really consume a lot of time and a lot of energy.
Yes.
So how do you stay focused on the results?
Well, it's a very interesting thing. Teamwork does take time. And when people say, listen, we don't have any time for this teamwork kind of stuff, we got things to accomplish, the truth of the matter is if you can step back and invest some time in building a team, they can outperform a non-team any day. But it does take time up front. Results are the ultimate measure of a team. And nobody can say, well, we don't achieve our results, but I think we have a great team, we get along well. That's the definition not of a good team. So it's all about results, but it takes time. And sometimes it takes doing an exercise that might not directly connect to those results, but that'll allow you to get there in the long term.
So build a pyramid for me very quickly.
It's pretty simple, too. The first thing the team has to do is they have to build trust. And that they have to learn to get comfortable being vulnerable with one another and being open with one another. As a result of that, they'll be comfortable engaging in conflict. If they trust each other, they'll engage in conflict and know that they're not going to get hurt. If they don't, they won't do that. Conflict is important because once they engage in conflict and they really weigh in, then they're more likely to commit and buy in. So that's the next thing. They'll achieve real commitment to decisions. As a result of that commitment, they're going to hold each other accountable because they know everybody's in. Everybody's, signed their name to it or made their blood oath, and so they're going to hold each other accountable. And as a result of that accountability, the collective results of the team will be paramount, not everybody's individual ego or their budget or their staff.
That's great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
What are some signs of a dysfunctional team?
Well, if meetings are really boring and people are complaining about them, there is some dysfunction going on there because they're probably not having the kind of passionate dialogue they need to have. If you're getting a lot of back-channel conflict and people are complaining about each other outside of meetings and there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes, that's probably an example of it. The best one, though, is that they're just not accomplishing what they're supposed to be accomplishing because that is the ultimate measure of a team.
A lot of companies invest a lot of money and time in trying to build teams, and yet they still fail.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Well, I think too often there's kind of two schools of thought. One, we don't have any time for it, and let's just go golfing. So they're doing things that don't have anything to do with business. Or two, they're getting very touchy-feely and they're going and doing a ropes course, which I suppose can be good, but I don't think catching somebody falling out of a chair, out of a tree, or blindfolding them and leading them around a hotel has a heck of a lot to do with making marketing and sales work better together. I think what they need to do is recognize that it takes time, but it needs to be relevant and it needs to be embedded in what they're trying to accomplish at work.
A part of their culture.
Yeah.
Rather than the gimmick du jour.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it starts with the CEO and the executive team. Oftentimes I see them saying, I wish these people would work better together. These silos are driving me crazy. And then I'll say, well, how are people working together at the executive level? Well, we don't have time to worry about that.
What would you say are some behaviors of high-performing teams?
That they can say things to one another. If you were to go behind the scenes into a meeting with them, they would say things to one another that you would think would be too sensitive. And you think, man, I can't believe they said that. But for them, it's like a family. It's like they know their heart's in the right place.
You're working on a team, and I know this is probably not an exact answer to this, but how much or what percentage of time should be spent on team building in an organization?
That's a great point. I think that up front in a new team, it's difficult to say exactly, but certainly once a team is up and running, if they're not spending 15 to 20% of their time together, then they're not together enough. And oftentimes people will say, well, I don't want to go to meetings with the rest of my team because that's a waste of my time. And my answer is, well, what else do you do? I mean, you're not a field goal kicker. You're not growing corn. You're not delivering babies. You're an executive. Most of what we do is we get into a room with other human beings and hash things out and make decisions. What's too much time to do that? So I think if you're not spending 20% of your time together in a room working together, then you're probably not spending enough, and it probably ought to be more than that.
That's where the work gets done.
Yeah, I mean, what's the rest of it? Email, and you got to do some of that stuff, but the real work is getting together in a room.
You compare meetings to movies.
Yes. Elaborate
at that just a bit.
Well, and the book explains this as well. I was a screenwriter, as we talked about before, and for fun, and I realized a staff meeting is often about 2 hours. And a movie is designed to be 2 hours, and a screenplay is supposed to write 120 pages, which is a page a minute. And I thought, why do people sit in a theater in the dark, pay a lot of money for bad food with sticky stuff on their feet for 2 hours, and happily so, and complain about going to a 2-hour meeting? And the reason why is because screenwriters and directors long ago figured out that if you didn't do a few things in your movies, nobody would watch it. And one of the things is you have to hook them. In the first 10 minutes of every movie, if you haven't hooked your audience, they're going to drift, and they're going to form a negative opinion of your movie. And I say the same thing to leaders. What is your hook? How do you get them bought in that first 10 minutes? Give them a reason to care. It's either a competitive threat or an internal threat or something going on that's worth some anxiety over. And then you have to nurture that conflict and draw people out. Every great movie is full of conflict. Man versus man, or woman versus woman, man versus nature, man versus himself. So I borrow upon a lot of ideas from screenwriting to try to make a 2-hour movie as interesting as a 2-hour meeting as interesting as a movie.
So somebody says, and I'm the team leader, and says, when it comes to meetings, less is best. Your quick answer to them would be?
Not necessarily. Interestingly enough, when you look at my whole meeting model, it can mean you spend less time in meetings, but it means the time in meetings is more interesting, compelling, and relevant to the business. Less is definitely not better. It's like saying a movie's shorter. Like, that was a 90-minute movie. That's much better than the 2-hour one because I didn't have to take as much time. Well, Braveheart's a lot more interesting than Who Moved My Car or whatever. Dude, where's my car? Right. Braveheart was like over 3 hours, and you're sitting there the whole time interested. Right. So I don't think less is best.
So the advantages, again, of an off-site meeting versus an in-house meeting?
It's purely that distraction. It's just something about, like, my wife is a stay-home mom right now, and it's just hard for her to do certain things when she's at home because she's always in her workplace. And it's hard for her to relax at home and to think because every time she looks someplace, she's reminded of stuff she has to do. And when you're in your office, you're just constantly reminded of your email and a meeting and that person and this thing and a phone call. Getting out of the office just changes the scenery enough to make you think differently.
Patrick, what are some of the signs of a leader over-functioning in a meeting?
Well, and that's a big problem. I mean, there's a balance that needs to be struck there. One, if they're dominating the conversation, and if other people are sitting there dumbfounded when they're asked for input, that's certainly a sign. But I also see leaders saying, well, I don't want to over-function or I don't want to dominate, so I'm just going to sit back. Well, then everybody's sitting there wondering what the leader's thinking. I think the key for a leader is, and it's a challenge, but that's why they're paid the medium-sized bucks, to be a leader. They have to do a good job of both facilitating and weighing in because they are seen as a key point of information, which is why sometimes during offsites, it's a good idea to bring in a facilitator. So then the leader can say, listen, I'm not facilitating, I'm just taking part in this, and I can turn off that part of my brain.
You know, I've read all your books. It's absolutely terrific stuff. It's really is. It's life changing. It's terrific stuff. What's on the horizon? What projects do you have going? What's next?
Well, I think that I'm going to try to apply a lot of this to families, as you did. You know, I have 6-year-old boys, and I'm realizing that being a parent is not terribly different than being a CEO. And so there may be a book in that, and I'm very interested in starting a company called the Kitchen Table Group to go with my company, the Table Group. And other than that, you know, I'm an ENFP in Myers-Briggs, so I never know what my next day is like, so I'm just following my nose. Right. So hopefully...
Well, you're good at it.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, we have your website up on the screen right now. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that could be of service to people?
Yeah, tablegroup.com. We have grown, and with the popularity of the books, we've tried to put more out there that people can benefit from. Some of it is free, some of it is paid for. There's a lot of information about me and the ideas that we have in our books. And so there's just a whole bunch of information there. There's an online survey. We have a video for people that can't afford or don't have the time to bring me out. And there's a field guide that's coming out. We're trying to productize this stuff so more people can take advantage of it, because my time was getting spread too thin.
Patrick, you are doing such a great service to organizations, profit, nonprofit, families, people in general. You're talking about issues that will help me be a better person, and I appreciate all the work you're doing. Your team, you keep it small and lean, and you move quickly, and I'm glad you are unfocused, and yet you're very focused. It's been a delight to have you on our show, and thanks for being with us on Leadership Track.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Mike.